and there are quite a lot of them. So this is from the WHO, and this is the world mortality in 2002. It's roughly the same now, I would say. And you can't read very much. It's practically impossible to read even on my computer screen at home. The point here is that over 1 year, there is this awful number of total deaths. Every one of them is an outrage. But then there are, of course, different causes. So down here, these are non-communicable conditions. That is things like chronic diseases. Up here you have communicable conditions like infections of different kinds. Over here we've got injuries. And as we can see, actually, these chronic ones take up quite a lot of space. So in particular here, this segment is vascular diseases. And then over up here you get various kinds of cancers. Up here you get respiratory diseases. The problem here is, of course, that it's pretty hard to make any sense of it. Especially the numbers don't really mean anything. We have absolutely no intuition what 57 million people actually means. So one way of dealing with this, which I think is pretty fun, is micromorts. So this was Ronald A. Howard at Stanford, I think, who suggested this. So a micromort is a 1 in a million probability of death, measured over some time, usually 1 year or maybe and in some cases over 1 day. And the reason to think about micromorts is that suddenly a lot of these numbers and probabilities gets brought over into a scale where we're actually pretty good at thinking about numbers. We can think about 1, 2, and 3. We know that 57 is a lot more than 13. We don't need to do an accurate division. It's much harder when we measure things in millions and hundreds of thousands. Howard's research suggests that people in various psychological experiments, which he set up, are willing to pay a few dollars up to $20 to reduce a risk. In his experiment, he had this imaginary scenario where you're really in pain because you have a toothache, and now you can take a pill that's going to cure you, except that there is a slight probability that it's actually just going to kill you painlessly. And now is the question, how much would you pay to not use the NHS pill, which might kill you, and this private pill, which actually guaranteed to just cure you and not kill you? And it turns out that when you set this up carefully, you can actually measure relatively reliably for small risks that a micromort has a kind of fixed value. A lot of complications in here, and it's very easy to get these values changed, of course, by the cognitive biases, by how you frame things. And when risks get really big, we think about them very differently. So in general, the accident risk in the Western world is about 1 millimort per day, to get kind of set things up. And it turns out I checked that my mortality rate right now is about 3.4 millimorts per day. Which suggests that right now accident risk is still a pretty sizable thing, but as I'm getting older, if I don't get any life extension, I'm going to be getting more and more from the various kinds of illnesses. And this way we can actually reformulate this. So now we can look at how many millimorts per year does the WHO data produce. And it turns out that we get about 9,000 millimorts per year of total mortality risk for all these causes. So we can drill down here a bit. So this is the communicable diseases. So over here we got AIDS, which over a year across the whole world's population. And we get 446 millimorts, which is quite sizable. Diarrhea is 289, so it's sizable. Tuberculosis is about the same size. On the other hand, you have various childhood diseases here for 181 millimorts. And these ones, of course, since we involve children, we tend to care much more to actually fix. Malaria is 204. And then you got various nasty tropical diseases around here. Most of them won't kill you, they're just disabling or terribly, terribly jucky. But of course, some of these diseases also have the side effects on increasing risks for other things. For example, maternal conditions and problems while giving birth. That actually has a very sizable effect, about 400 millimorts. So now we can actually start making estimates. Well, which ones of these problems are biggest? which there would be actually, if we had a certain amount of money and want to actually face the biggest one, should be aim at. Similarly, looking at the non-commutable, the ones you can't get from your neighbors, and over here we get various cancers. Respiratory diseases are interesting because this is, of course, where flu is hiding. So, but on the other hand, it turns out this one, you can't really read it, but this is smoking related. So, already we can notice that, well, this is a pretty hefty chunk. If people just stopped smoking, that chunk would largely go away. And similarly here, we got the stroke.
Sorry, can I just clarify? That's a chunk out of total respiratory.
This one, that one is
like
asthma.
80-90% of the chronic destructive.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
About 80%, is it, of the total respiratory disease?
I think something like that.
Oh,
yeah.
right,
Yeah. I'm probably going to actually create something online that you can play around with. I would have done this with the UK material, but it was actually too yummy. It had even more interesting statistics where you could break it down by sex and age. So I'm probably going to make some kind of little applet where you can play around with it to also try to find out what risks you should be most worried about. But looking at this kind of total average, for example, it seems that yes, fixing heart disease, well, that's a very big chunk. And the fixing stroke, that's also an enormous big. Curing cancer, well, it would be important, but you also get a very lot of different cancers and might be tricky. Some other diseases are very small and they might still be quite disabling. This is just what people die of. For example, relatively few people die of eye conditions. It happens actually. Last year, one person, no, I think it was 5 people actually in the UK died from eye conditions. I have no clue what they died of, but they did. And then, of course, comes the really interesting thing, the injuries. And the vast majority are unintentional. And the vast majority of those are either a mixed bag of random things or traffic. And then we have things like poisoning, that's 56 millimorts, falls 63 millimorts, fires 50 millimorts, drowning 61 millimorts. On the other hand, here is the intentional one, and suicide is 140 millimorts, violence is 90 millimorts, and war 28 millimorts. And this is across the whole world. Where there are a few pretty nasty wars going on right now, but you can still see that actually war compared to the others is very much less of a killer. We might still consider the intentional for moral reasons to be much more serious and we want to reduce them.
So Anders, I presume you're going to come to this, but all of the statistics are about how things have been in the past.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
the hard thing is, well, maybe some of these statistics are going to change dramatically in the future.
So in the case of injuries, for example, we know it can be changed quite a lot. This is worldwide. If we're looking at the UK, a lot of this would be different. First of all, the number of injuries would be much lower. It's very vivid in Europe, between the Western Europe and the Eastern Europe, in terms of just sheer safety. Not just traffic safety, but that parks are safer, there are better lighting, and all these things. Relatively small things can actually reduce mortality, especially childhood mortality, quite a lot. So there is, I think I got, well, just jumping ahead. So this is a pie diagram, I haven't got any units on it, about preventable risks, for example. How many deaths are caused by stuff that we could actually fix more or less easily. So smoking, for example, is so this is just part of all the deaths, but this is stuff we can fix. Here's high cholesterol, here's malnutrition, sexually transmitted infection, poor diet, overweight, physical inactivity, alcohol, indoor air pollution from solid fuels, unsafe water, and this is hypertension. Yeah.
But you can prevent or even cure most of it simply by changing the lifestyle.
Yeah.
Diet and exercise, and that's it.
Yeah, a lot of this is pretty, well, I wouldn't say easy to fix, but some of them, like STDs, I think is definitely easy to fix. It's going to be trickier, for example, to fix the indoor air pollution, but we want to do that for environmental reasons anyway. The cooking fires of India are causing a tremendous environmental effect of the Indian Ocean.
And
yeah.
The thing is, though, about that kind of diagram, okay, assume at this immediate moment you immediately have the power of the weekly superhuman, you know, the power of the god. You can immediately say, everyone tomorrow stop smoking. the point is that it's still the mortality. In 10 years' time, you plot the new graphs with